Hi guys, welcome back in another video where we're going to be creating this amazing good looking form as you can see, and also we are going to be making it functionable, meaning that we're going to work on the code and all the logics needed to make it working. To showcase this, like for example, if I enter an email like this. As you can see, we're having the screen border. And if I enter a password like this, we're having it green again because those inputs are following the rules that we set. So when I click on the login for button, we get this message. And let's say, for example, one of them is not valid. As you can see, the green is not here because it's not valid. And also when I click on this icon, I get the text password of the password, and when I click on the login, we have this message. So we're going to work on all of those things to create this amazing form. So if you want to learn how to do so, stick with me till the end of this video. All right, we are in our Visual Studio Code, and here I created the login form component with its CSS file in the folder login form, and as you can see, it's totally empty. I'm importing the CSS file, and of course, I'm importing the component into the app.js, and here is the import. And also one thing that I want to mention that along the way of creating our login form, I'm going to use some external components. So they aren't here at the moment, but I'm going to create them later on. So let's get started. Here, as you can see, I first added, of course, the HTML body of the project of the login form components. So I'm gonna explain each div or each element. So the first thing here, we are going to go to the login form container class name. As you can see, this is this div. And also we're adding this good looking oval sphere at the top. And I'm going to go to the login form. I'm gonna close this login form.css. So the first thing that I added is the font. I imported it from Google. I added this font family Poppins. It's very popular font, and also it makes your project look good. Here is the login form container. As you can see, here are the styling properties. And also one thing that I want to point out here to create this oval sphere, I'm using the before pseudo class. So the first thing, the content, obviously it's going to be nothing. The position is absolute, so I can be able to change and move the whole container freely. And as you can see here, the width is 660 pixel to make it wider. And also to make it even wider, I'm using the border radius 50%. And here I'm gonna clear that out. I'm gonna save the file. And as you can see, here first how it looks. So in order to hide the excess of it outside the container, we are using the overflow hidden property. And of course, here we have the texts, and these are their styling properties, so nothing complex here. And one thing that I want to point out here, I want to show you are those components, the inputs, and I created them externally of the login form.js component. And I'm gonna open up the structure of the project. And as you can see, inside the login form, we have two new folders, the email input and the password input. And right now, they are just returning an empty input tag. And also what I'm doing here, and here they are creating a placeholder uh, argument or prompt as we do for the normal input. But because it is a custom input, that's why I did them here so I can dissociate the login form structure and the logic from those inputs to make the code a little bit cleaner. And also I'm going to add other prompts as we move on with our project. And the same for the password input. We are returning empty input, and we are taking this prompt placeholder from the login form.js. I'm taking the interior email placeholder, for example, in the email input component, and we are placing it here so we can have this interior email placeholder shows up here. So now I'm gonna move on with my project and I'm gonna explain what I did. So as you can see right now, the inputs are looking much cooler. But before we go into the CSS of each one, I want to talk briefly about what I added in the body HTML. So the first thing that I added is the icon, of course. Here it is. I'm using the font awesome icon library. And the second thing that I added is this email input root class name, which encompasses those two elements. And here, as you can see, when I click on the input, the border gets changed, its color gets changed, and the same for the icon. And I'm going to show you what I did to style that into the CSS file. So here we are in the email input CSS. And the first thing that I added is the padding. So this is the general padding, and I'm adding the padding left to 45 pixel so I can leave some room to the icon here. And the width, of course, I shrinked it to 86% because it goes beyond the main container. And of course here, in order to trigger this, I need to use the focus to change the color of the border. And here I'm using the focus within state that is linked to the root element of this input. So when I do this, the color changes. And of course, in order to change the position of the icon, I had to make it absolute. And here are the top and left properties. And of course, I had to make the main container as relative in its position. So this is also is working for the password input. So right now, the next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add this icon. So if you click on it, you can be able to show your password. And also I'm gonna add the remaining elements such as the button. And also I'm gonna add the sign with Google button and also the text. If you don't have an account, you can create one at the bottom of the main container. So here is our final version of our form. It is looking pretty nice so far. And I'm gonna dive into the elements that I added. So as I said, the first thing that I added is this icon to be able to show the password. So right now it's not working because I didn't add any code for this logic. Normally when I click on it, the password gets shown. And when I click on it again, the password is hidden. Next, and also before we move on to the other elements, I'm going to explain briefly and quickly the styling of it. So obviously I had to make it absolute with its position so I can be able to move it freely inside the container that has those two elements, which are the input and those two icons. And of course, to make it at this position, I had to use those properties, the positioning properties. Next, we have the login button, and I'm going to go to our login form.js, and here is our button with the type submit. That's obvious because we are using it inside the form tags. So when the user add information in the input, those information gets submitted. And also, I'm gonna go to our login form.css to just show you the styling of this button. So there are pretty much a lot of things here, but I'm gonna just explain some of the most important stuff like the gradient. I'm using the linear gradient function here, and also I'm using the border radius 35 pixel to make those rounded edges, which makes the button looks fancy. And the hover state, so when I hover over the button, as you can see, it gets a little bit wider and bigger. And I the colors in the linear gradient to give it this look when I hover over the button. And next we have this don't have an account text, and I'm going to show you in the HTML of the component. And as you can see, here is our don't have an account text with the don't have account class name. And also I'm going to show you the CSS of it. I'm going to go back to our login form.css. And here is its styling. It's very simple. I'm making the text centered with some margin and the font size 17 pixel. And for the A tag, I'm making the color purple, and the font size, I make it a little bit bigger with the 18 pixel. And finally, in our form, we have those two elements. We have this and the button, sign in with Google button. So let's head back over our login form.js. So in order to create that, the first thing that I created is this div Google button container that wraps around those two, the Google button that has two elements, the image for this icon to appear like this, and the text itself inside the span tag. The reason why I did this, so I can be able to create this element. And in order to do so, I'm using the after and before pseudo elements. And I'm going to show you how I did it, because normally what people would do is to create a line with div and just change its styling, but it won't work because you need to be doing a lot of computing in order to make sure that when the form or the window is resized, so this element to be always centered. That's why we're using the before and after pseudo elements. So I'm using the before pseudo element so I can be able to create this line. As you can see here, the content is empty. Of course, the position needs to be absolute so I can put it at the top of the main container, the Google button container. As you can see here is the top is 0 pixel, the height is 1 pixel, and the width I set it to 50% to be centered like this. And also I created the after. I added the after pseudo element here so I can be able to add this or text. As you can see here it is, the position, of course, absolute, and the top is like this. The width is 10 pixel. And also I added the padding so I can center it here. And to hide the line, I added the background color as white. And finally, we have the sign in with Google button. And here is its styling. It's very simple. And also the icon, I used the width as 40 pixel and the aspect ratio 1 to make the width and the height equal. And I'm going to show you how I used this icon into the code. And I imported it as a module and I called it Google icon. And here is the icon path. And here is the variable. I added into the source of the image tag. So things are simple here. So right now what I'm going to do, I'm going to make kind of this form alive. And what I'm going to do, I'm not going to go into complex stuff, like for example, using a Zod library for validation. I'm going to just use simple validation. And also I'm going to work on this icon to toggle it so I can, when the user clicks on it, the password is shown, and when he or she clicks back on the button, it is hidden. And here, as you can see, I made this password input functioning like this. So I wrote my password text. So when I click on this button, it gets hidden, and I click again on it, we get back our text. And I'm going to explain what I did in the code to understand how it is working. So the first thing that I did, I added the is visible state so I can be able to make that working, this icon, and to rely upon so I can be able to use it for other things. Like here, I'm using the tyranny operator. So when the is visible is true, the type is set to text, otherwise it is set to password. And also the same for the icon. If it is true, we are using this icon from the font awesome library. Otherwise, we're just using a normal eye icon. And I'm gonna explain when I click on this button what's gonna happen. And in order to do so, I'm using the toggle click function with the onClick event listener. And of course, I'm gonna set the is visible to true or otherwise to false by using this line. And here we are using the focus function. So when I click on this, the function or the focus stays in the input. But as you can see here, I'm using the set timeout. Why? And in order to understand why I did it, I'm going to move the set timeout out of the way and I'm going to save the file, re-render the whole thing, and we are going to wait for a little bit. Then I'm going to click on this and I'm going to add some text here. And as you can see here, and you will see here, when I click the focus gets at the start to the character, even though I'm using those lines. So when I put back the set timeout function, and as you will see that it's not going to be the case. When I refresh the page and the component gets re-rendered and I type some text like this and I click on this icon, it is fixed because of the set timeout. And the reason why, because of the asynchronous nature of React. So when we do this immediately after we change the state, it changes before React finishes rendering the whole thing. So it's like saying to React, hey, wait a little bit until we do the focus thing, then you can finish rendering the whole component. So that's why it is working, and that's why we are using the set timeout here. And here we are in our final portion of our video. We're going to be creating the validation logic and the submission logic after we click on the login button. So I'm not going to use any library whatsoever. I'm going to keep things simple. And the idea that I want to create is I want to make this whole border green if only the email is correct, and the same for the password. So here we are almost at the final stage of our form. And here I'm going to show you briefly of the things that I added for the validation logic. Here, as you can see, the email form is totally valid. And as you can see, those borders are green, and the same for the password. So the criteria that I set for the email, it need to have this valid form of the email, of course, and to do so, I used the regex object with the test function to test if it is correct or not. And for the password, I just set the length. And I don't want to go deep into the validation thing, probably for another video, just to explain how it works and the basics of it. Also, I'm going to show you something very, very important here. Like for example, if I click here outside of the input and I go back, it's still green. And that is something that I had to code, of course, and the same for the password. But if, for example, the length is less than 6, as you can see, we return to our default purple color. And when I click here outside of it and I go back, the green is not here and it is still the purple. So I'm going to show you all the things that you need to do to code this logic. So first I created this valid state variable so you can be able to know whether the input is valid or not. It's pretty straightforward. But also I'm creating the email input for the change of the characters inside the input. And so the first thing that I'm going to start with is the onChange event listener, but also the value of the input that is linked to the email input variable state. So whenever the state of the input changes, this function is triggered, and we are going to go to our function, and I'm going to explain each line. The first is setting, and we are using the e object, so we can be able to access to the value of the characters that we are putting in our input, and we are updating the email input state. And here we are, what we are doing is we are checking if the input is valid. So we are creating a new constant and we are using this custom function validate email that returns whether the email is valid based on this, on the regex object with the function test. So if it is true, so as we type in our input, this is what's going behind the scene. So when it is true, we are gonna use this tyranny operator to set the border as green, otherwise as purple. And we are gonna return is valid email to update the is valid state. And after that, what I'm doing here, also I'm creating another border color state independently from others states, so I can be able to control the border here. Because here, as you can see here, we're using the onBlur and onFocus event listeners. So here, when onBlur means when the focus is out of the input, we are setting or using the border color state. So if it is valid, and this border color is based on the is valid, as you can see here. So for example, when I click here and there is already green, so I can save the state of the border color, which is green. So when I click here and I go back, it is still there. So that's why I'm using the border color variable independently from other states. So here, here is green, and when I click here, we set it to purple. And when I click back, it is green again because I'm using this statement. If it is valid, we're going to set the border is green. And let's assume that is not valid. As you can see, we are having the default purple color. And when I click out of it and I go back, it's not green because of this statement. And the same for the password. The only change, as I said, is the criteria. That's it. And here we are with our final form. Everything is set up right now, so this form can be used. So our submission or validation logic is working, and I'm going to show you, like for example, this border is green means that this password is valid, and this is also is valid. So when I click on the login, I get this message submitting the form. And let's say, for example, the password is not correct, and when I click on the login, I get this message. So I'm going to show you everything behind the scene and how I created this logic. So I'm going to go back to my code and I'm going to start with the email input. And of course, what is done for the email input is the same for the password input. So the first thing that I added is the is input valid callback. And one thing that I did mention, I apologize for that, is what we are going to use in order to pass up the information that is valid to the parent component. And this is what is called the callback function. And this is what I'm going to explain. So as I said, the first element that I created is this argument is input valid callback that I use to send the information to the login form.js. So here is where I'm using this callback function, and in it, as you can see, I'm passing this is valid email, which is this constant. And this is what's going to happen when I'm updating this is valid state. I'm passing the information to the login form, which is the parent component. And here we are going to take this information and pass it to this is email valid callback function. And here is the function that has the value, which is this is valid. This is the value here. I'm going to go back to the login form. and we are going to update this object. And that's what we are going to use to know whether we are going to set or submit the information or not. And we are going to rely upon for the condition. And I'm gonna go back to my code and go straight to the form tag. And here in the submit event listener, we have this submit function. And this is where we are going to set our condition. So only when the email and password property of this object is true, we are going to log this submit the form. And you can do other stuff in here. Otherwise, we are going to set or show this message. Just for simplicity, I'm showing those logs. But in production or in real life, you gotta do other things like connecting to the database and other stuff so you can access, for example, to the website or the app or the dashboard or wherever. So that's pretty much how we created this form. I know there are a lot of work and a lot of things that need to be done, but also I think that this project, even if it seems that is easy, but there are a lot of things going on, and you can learn a lot of concepts from just this simple form. So here we are in our final part of our video. So if you like this video, give a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. And also leave your feedback on the comment section to know what need to be improved in my videos, what are the things that are bothering you, so I can be able to develop my videos on myself. So thank you for watching this video. And also, if you wanna get the code, you can head over the video below in the description, and you can find the link of the post, and there you will find the whole code of this form.